Don, is your role as both the Division III National Court of Umpires as well as Director of Recreation and Intramurals, you are in charge of either training and developing new officials or as well as umpires trying to get into college baseball. What would you say would be the biggest area of focus for people trying to get into either baseball or other sports?
Well, I think the bottom line is recruitment and being mentors from my standpoint, which obviously I'm given a tremendous opportunity to do as a director of campus recreation and intramurals. I work constantly trying to develop young men and women to come into the environment that we do. So I am one small cog in this, and when I meet with veteran officials, one of the last things I always say in my conversations is your responsibility should be to try to find at least one individual each year and recruit them into the process, because that's the challenge, is getting them in, but then also it's getting them to maintain and stay. And I kind of use the 3-year rule, get them in, get them involved, and then get them moving on where there's some investment. Because if there's some investment and some support, they may stick around, because most individuals don't know. They waltz in and like, okay, well, what do I have to do? They don't know anything about equipment and assigners and registration. So I think from that process is as much about mentoring as it is to just make that process cycle, because our average age of officials, is me and above. And we have a serious dilemma across the country in every sport.
You spoke to the mentorship piece, and at Young and Umpires, we really strive to be mentors to younger and newer officials across the board.
Mm-hmm.
And we've seen, and like to point out that there is a lack of mentorship across the board at organizations and let's say boards.
Mm-hmm.
What do you think? How would you approach starting a mentorship program within those organizations?
Well, I think the first place it needs to start, and this is something I'm actually trying to do in my area of the country or where I personally live, and that's to almost have like a jamboree, an invitee process where somebody could come in for a one-stop shop. But to do that, you need to be able to work with the media, print and radio and TV, so that and the state associations, to make sure they're all aware and on board that we're going to have this event. And then try to get as many people to come in. So if they come in, let's say you came in the door, it's like, I'm interested in being involved as a track official or swimming or lacrosse or hockey, whatever it is, and have somebody there that can say, hey, come on over. I'm going to introduce you to some members of the individuals who do this. We're going to talk with representatives from the state association about how to get registered, talk to you about how to purchase items, and then getting you in connection with the associations to start a training program, which means the training or the associations have to be on board when we recruit these individuals to start them into the fold and just not throw them to the wolves. I hope that when somebody starts out, you want them to be respectful and soak up as much information as possible. The challenge, I think, sometimes for a young official is they may be hearing from so many different angles, taking in information. And I told them in the past, I said, try to find officials you trust, that you really feel like they're giving you good advice. You're hoping that they're able to take that and separate it out to what is good advice and what isn't good advice versus just like trying to apply it all. This is where I think working with officials, finding the right mentors that I trust and making sure they're working with young officials, or I shouldn't say young, just less experienced, to make sure they're getting good advice to proceed accordingly forward. Because if they're getting unsolicited bad advice, it's not going to help them develop their game or their confidence level. So I think it's important as an association or members that are supporting is to make sure you have a gathering or group of people that I would trust that can pass that information along to move them to the next level. And if you're just out there kind of flying solo, if you find somebody that you do trust that's giving good advice, boy, that's somebody you need to gravitate and stay with, because they're sending you the right direction.
To go along with that, can you speak to the role of constantly learning, both professionally and personally, as an official?
I don't think we ever stop learning. I am blessed in the fact that I am in a position to, be the national coordinator. But I'm also very fortunate that I can still be on the field and work. I think there's a tremendous responsibility in that when I'm out working, it's not about me necessarily getting to a championship myself, but to represent accordingly what I think is the right way to do it. And I think that is essential. But on the field, off the field behavior, it's all a package. We think about what's the right way to do things. If we're projecting ourselves on media inappropriately or statements that would be considered inappropriate, it's as much of a death knell or a negative as it is things you do on the field. So I think it's important, again, to be aware of your surroundings. We are representatives of the game and arbiters, and people look to us to be role models in some sense. The character and keep the game whole. Sometimes less is said is just better, and how we go about carrying ourselves as ambassadors for the game is crucial, I think, and that's something I try to pass on to the next level. Like, people know who you are, particularly in smaller towns. Like, hey, I saw you at the game the other night, and you know what? It's fun to talk about that. Like, yeah, they talk about plays, and I really take great pleasure in that and the experiences. And people know who you are, and hope that you're as good a person on the field as you are off the field.
Last question: what is some advice you would give a young gun umpire that is currently in the game or trying to get into the game?
I think in a broad sense is, don't be a good listener. This kind of went back to what you said before. Take in as much information as you can. Don't be afraid to speak up, but do it in the approach. When you're in a group setting and you have a question, don't be afraid to ask a question. I also tell young gun or younger umpires or less experienced that if you're on the field and there's a gathering of the officials, hopefully they have the confidence, and hopefully they're being treated that their information that they may want to share is important. That just because they're the third wheel in a crew, let's say, that they are no less important to the crew, that if they see something like, hey, we need to talk about this, that's sometimes tough when you're working with two veterans. It's like, well, they've got it. What I say isn't going to matter. Well, it does matter. And it's important for us as crew mates to make sure they feel the same way, that their information is valuable. And I've had many officials that have come through, starting as students working campus rec for me, that worked onto junior high and high school crews that worked varsity games with me before they left the area, and I made sure that they felt valued. But to make sure they're valued, they have to have confidence, and hopefully we're instilling that confidence to do so. So really, don't be afraid to ask questions. But at the last thing about that, when you ask a question, you have to be prepared for the answer. And sometimes it's not what they want to hear, and they're like, oh, they brush it off. Well, if you're going to ask it, you've got to be ready for the answer. But I think when we're trying to teach, we want to make it as educational as possible, so it makes it a better, good learning experience, and they can apply it to the field. I think that's what I'd say.